There's this part of the Constitution that most of us barely think about until suddenly we're in the middle of a crisis, and then it's all anyone can talk about. I'm talking about the 25th Amendment. And lately, it's jumped right out of the law books and into the center of our political debates.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The thing is, while we hear the 25th Amendment thrown around a lot, so much of that conversation is based on a huge misunderstanding of what it is, how it's supposed to work, and maybe the most important part, what it was never, ever designed to do.
So in this explainer, we're going to cut right through all that noise. We're going to break down this incredibly important constitutional failsafe piece by piece so we can all understand its real power and its very real limits. We'll kick things off by looking at the dangerous gaps in the Constitution that made this amendment so necessary. Then we'll see how it was created and how it was tested in a major crisis. We're also going to demystify its most controversial part, Section 4. And finally, we'll look at the new challenges it faces today before leaving you with one last question to think about.
To really get why the 25th Amendment is so important, we have to rewind the clock back to a time before it even existed, when the country was dealing with a pretty scary and recurring problem. So the original Constitution had a plan for if a president died or resigned, but it was shockingly vague about what to do if a president was still alive but just couldn't do the job. And this wasn't some theoretical what-if problem. It was basically a constitutional time bomb just waiting to go off. And that bomb? Well, it went off over and over again. In 1881, President Garfield was shot and just lingered for months, totally unable to work. Then in 1919, President Wilson had a massive stroke, and his wife basically ran the country in secret. Even in the 1950s, with President Eisenhower's health scares, they just had these informal handshake agreements. It wasn't until the shock of President Kennedy's assassination in 1963 that Congress finally realized they had to fix this for good.
And just try to wrap your head around this for a second. For 79 days, that's how long President Garfield was incapacitated. The most powerful country in the world had no one clearly in charge. His own cabinet was terrified to do anything because they were afraid it would look like a coup. This kind of paralysis was exactly what the 25th Amendment was created to stop.
So, after decades of these close calls and genuine constitutional crises, a real solution was finally hammered out. In 1967, the 25th Amendment was officially ratified, and it gave the nation something it had been missing for almost 200 years, a clear, step-by-step rulebook. It's really built on 4 key pillars, and each one addresses a different weak spot. Let's start with Section 1. This one seems obvious, but it's absolutely vital. It makes it official, constitutional law that the vice president becomes the actual president. No more weird confusion about being an acting president. The job is theirs, period. Section 2 plugs another huge hole. Before 1967, if the vice president's office became empty, it just stayed empty. This section fixed that. It makes sure we always have someone in the line of succession by letting the president pick a new VP, who then has to get approved by Congress. Okay, Section 3 is the most straightforward part. It's for when a president knows ahead of time they're going to be out of commission. Like if they're going in for surgery. They just send a letter, the VP takes over as acting president, and when they're good to go, they send another letter and take the power right back. It's been used a few times, and it works just like it's supposed to. And then we get to Section 4. This is the big one. It's the most complicated, the most controversial, and definitely the most misunderstood part of the whole amendment. This is the process for when a president can't or won't say that they're unable to govern. And it really didn't take long for this new constitutional machinery to get a real-world test. And not because of a medical issue, but because of the biggest political scandal in American history. So here's how the Watergate crisis put this brand new amendment to work. In 1973, right as the scandal was blowing up, Vice President Agnew resigned. So President Nixon used the new powers from Section 2 to nominate Gerald Ford. Congress confirmed him. Then, less than a year later, Nixon himself resigned. And just like that, Section 1 kicked in, and Gerald Ford, a man nobody had actually voted for to be president or vice president, was sworn into office. This quote from Nixon's aide, Alexander Haig, just perfectly captures the gravity of that moment. He said that from the second Ford was sworn in as VP, everyone in Washington basically saw him as the president in waiting. The 25th Amendment gave the country a stable, constitutional off-ramp from all that chaos. So you might be wondering, if Sections 1 and 2 worked so well, Why is Section 4 the one everyone argues about? Well, it's because it deals with the explosive idea of taking power away from a president against their will, and it was intentionally designed to be incredibly hard to do. Probably the biggest mistake people make is confusing Section 4 with impeachment, but they are completely different animals. Impeachment is a political tool for high crimes and misdemeanors, and it leads to getting permanently kicked out of office. Section 4 is about a medical or cognitive inability, and it only results in a temporary handoff of power. And get this, if the president fights back, Section 4 needs a two-thirds vote in both the House and the Senate. That's an even tougher vote to win than impeachment. So here's the bottom line. Section 4 is basically a political non-starter in most situations. I mean, just think about it. You're asking a vice president and a cabinet, people who were appointed by the president, who serve at the pleasure of the president, to turn on their boss. It's been called political career suicide for a reason. The whole system is deliberately stacked in the president's favor. But here's the thing. The amendment was designed for a totally different political era. And today, with hyperpartisanship and some creative legal arguments, people have found potential weaknesses that nobody even dreamed of back in 1967. Which leads us to a fascinating and, frankly, a pretty unsettling question. What if a president gets a tip that their own cabinet is about to make a move against them? Could they actually stop the whole process before it even starts? And this is the potential loophole. It's actually not clear if acting secretaries, the ones who haven't been confirmed by the Senate, get a vote in a Section 4 declaration. Now, if they can vote, a president could just fire anyone they think is disloyal and put their own people in to block the move. But if they can't vote, firing cabinet members just makes the voting pool smaller, which could actually make it easier for the rest of them to get a majority. Legal experts are totally split on this, and that ambiguity is a huge potential problem. When you boil it all down, the 25th Amendment was really built to solve the problem of a president in a coma. It wasn't designed for a president who's conscious, defiant, and at the center of a massive political storm. It was built on a foundation of institutional trust that, well, feels pretty shaky in the 21st century. Which brings us to our final question. The people who wrote the 25th Amendment, they thought that making the president's own most loyal advisors the ones to pull the trigger on Section 4 was the ultimate safeguard. It would stop it from being used for political reasons. But in our world today, where political loyalty seems to trump everything else, is that very safeguard the thing that makes it almost impossible to use, even in a real crisis? Is it a failsafe, or is it a fatal flaw?